Hey there, and welcome to The Aspiring Professional. I'm your host, Michael Simonton, and each week I'll be joined by a professional to talk about some of the traits and qualities that guided them to their success. Through this, we hope to provide some insights and advice for all of the aspiring professionals out there to help propel them along their journey to success. Thank you for joining us, and if you like the podcast, don't forget to hit subscribe so that each week you can get more of this awesome content. Good evening, Joey Wickham. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, man, it is going well. It's a good day, a good weekend.
Yeah, it's about the same over here. It's just a fantastic day. Happy to be getting up and getting after it on a beautiful Saturday, like always, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, man. So what I told you earlier, this podcast, it's primarily going to be for those people graduating high school, college, or trying to figure out their careers. And it's going to be a place and a resource for them to go to get some tips, tricks, and advice, as well as insights to the days of, different careers, different roles, and what are the actionable steps and things that they can do today to help move them along on their journey. So could you give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and not give you the hour-long version. I'll try and condense it into like 3 minutes. But so basically, I was raised in Wichita, Kansas area, and grew up homeschooled entire life. Entire like elementary, middle school, high school years was all homeschool. And after that point, I was kind of trying to figure out what the next steps were. I was never really a fan of the, kind of the college route unless I had like a very specific idea of what I wanted to go into that I knew required that. And so I took a gap year. I did a lot of like theater stuff during that gap year because for a while I was kind of interested in entertainment industry, wanted to be involved with music, theater, all that. So I did a lot that year. Next year, I did like a missions training program, lived on a mountain in a cabin with no electricity for a year, just gaining a lot of skills, construction, mechanics, animal husbandry, gardening, all that kind of stuff. And all of this was kind of an attempt to learn skills, figure out, what potentially I was good at, what I was interested in long-term, and really just overall increasing my abilities. So then I worked construction for a year, then I worked mechanics and on a turkey farm for a year. And it was at that point that I was really interested in getting more knowledge and diving into more of the professional world, especially around technology. So I did a business apprenticeship program called Praxis, which you know about. And through that program, just gained a lot of skills. I mean, I had no background in the business world at all before that, the professional world really. And so I did Praxis 6-month boot camp, learned a lot, specifically about sales. That was kind of the one that I ended up wanting to go kind of dive into. I wanted to get into sales because I'm a very people-oriented person. I wanted to help people. And after kind of getting a better understanding of what sales was, I started going after that. So did some projects around that. I had no experience in sales. So, did some interviews with salespeople, talked to salespeople, did a podcast, built up an email list, did some cold calling, and eventually through that and doing some other projects and kind of increasing that portfolio, got some interviews with some companies and, through that ended up getting to where my current role is right now, a company called Vital Interaction, where I work as an account manager. We're like a software startup. We work with healthcare practices. So I manage all of our clients there at Vital Interaction. And so yeah, it's been a crazy ride, and now in software sales, basically.
Right on, man. That's awesome. So what does the day-to-day of a software salesperson or an account manager look like then?
Yeah, it's interesting because especially in startup world, you find that everyone has a bunch of different roles in every company. Those roles are totally different depending on what company they are. So my role as an account manager, it's kind of shifted at different points. Sometimes it's been more of like those some of the outbound sales where you're like reaching out to people, you've got prospects that you have in mind or that you get brought, and you're going after those, trying to bring them in, doing demos for them, showing them the product that you have, seeing if it can be a good fit. So that was some of what I started with. what I really do now, kind of like my day to day, is just work with our current customers. So I work a lot on getting their utilization up and making sure that they're using our platform. So we work with these healthcare practices in communicating with their patients, automating workflows for them. And so my job really is to engage with our clients, be more proactive. So, if you've got like a support team, oftentimes they're going to be the reactive, right? So customers are upset, they've got issues, whatever, they're going to go to the support team. What I'm trying to do is go to the customer before that even happens, figure out, hey, how can you guys utilize our system better? Sometimes that'll end up in an upsell if I think that it's a good avenue for them to be able to generate more revenue, save time, save money, and really, as I said, just develop relationships with them. Figure out, hey, like, what are your pain points? Like, what is a problem for you as a practice? Is it something that we can help with? If it is, then great. If it's not, then I can't. So kind of to answer the base of the question, what is my day-to-day? I really just, I schedule meetings with my customers. I reach out to them and say, hey, can we schedule a meeting, talk about like, what things are going on? I have some ideas for you, things that might help. I do some research into the individual practice, what specialty they are, figuring out, what are the needs that I think could be there. So a lot of emails to people, a lot of phone calls to people, a lot of setting up screen shares even, and sharing with them what things could be done. So a lot of follow up with that.
Okay. And is any of this cold calling at all? I'm just curious because that's like most people's first, one of their first thoughts when they think of sales is the cold calling and all those outbound sales, but it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of that going on with your
Yeah,
role.
it was interesting. So when I first was interested in sales, like, as I mentioned earlier with some of my story going through Praxis, all that was like my initial thought. I was like, I want to be like an SDR, sales development representative, BDR, business development representative. And a lot of their job usually is that lead development, cold calling, cold calling people, trying to get people in, for those sales. So that was my original goal, was I wanted to go into a role like that. But I ended up kind of skipping over some of that and going straight into this account management role, which really is kind of the other side of that. So you have those people who may be calling out, trying to get those people in. And as an account manager, even like the first one that I was talking about, doing demos, it's really once they're already in. And so it's still kind of part of the sales process, right? Because you're trying to sell the product. You're trying to, if it's a good fit, trying to, get them hooked up with that. But so my role in particular does not really involve much cold calling, because I'm working with usually current customers or people that other people in my company have already brought in to like see the platform.
Yeah. So once someone else does that role of acquiring the customer through the cold calls and stuff, then you take over and you manage the account.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Exactly.
So what three traits or what 3 or 4 traits, attributes do you think, or would you attribute your success to, and where you are today? If you were to pinpoint like the 3 things that got you there, what would those be?
Yeah. I would say, so when I think of like 3 traits or something, and it's really difficult, especially in the role that I'm in, because it is really more about some of those soft skills. So some of those traits more than it is like the hard skills. And so like the 3 things that kind of come to mind initially, and I'll kind of explain each of them because they can be kind of broad. But one is just like communication skills. That's, I think, probably one of the biggest traits within really all of sales, a lot of different positions. Another one, which probably needs more explanation, but matching in conversation. And then the third one that I would say is probably follow-up. So these are all, they're not necessarily specific to my role. Some of them are definitely going to be more useful in a role like mine is. So communication in general, just the trait of being able to, it kind of goes both ways. So assessing things when they come in, when people are telling you stuff, being able to take that information in, turn it into something and give it back to them in answers or in solutions, or in just hearing, and figuring out what steps you need to take for the next step. So that communication of being kind of on that same page with them. And that's both written, through email communications, and also verbal in video calls. And, I mentioned earlier with my story, I did a lot of theater stuff. I had to like be able to communicate stuff well. And so I would say that was one of the huge traits that has helped me in the role I'm in. And so then the next one, as I said, kind of matching conversation, which is kind of an odd one to say, but It has to do still with communication, but it's a reading, like a reading of other people's level of like interest and personality even. So I've written a couple of blog posts on this, but it's I don't know if there's like an official way to say it, but almost like this match -1, what I think of it. So if you have 10 levels of personality for a person, right? So level 1 is like somebody who is super like just like has no personality. You like talking to them and everything that they say is monotone. They sound like they really hate your product and they're not interested in it. And then you've got the 10 who they're like, oh man, like this is so cool. This is exactly what we need. Man, I'm so excited about everything. Like you've got those levels, right? So one of the things that I think that for me in general comes more naturally, but something that can be learned as well, is this idea of match -1. And if you've got those 10 levels of people, when you're talking to them, whether in sales, whether you're in an interview, whatever you're doing, you take that level that they're at. So let's say they're a level 7 and you lower it 1. So if they're like pretty interested, they're that level 7, you go just like 1 level below to be a little less interested than they are. And somehow it heightens their own interest. So sometimes you've got somebody who's like a level 2 and they're just like, they seem not interested at all. But it's weird, but if you like go 1 level down and you're like even less interested than they are, you're like, man, it's honestly probably not going to be the right fit. It really probably isn't going to make sense. Like maybe if this were an issue, like it could help. And you start to almost like, it's like they're energetic all of a sudden. So that's kind of a big, long explanation. You could probably go way more in depth with it, but just that automatic ability to kind of match that conversation level. Cause everyone has that friend who it's like somebody's really down and sad and they're just like being all cheerful and happy. And it's like, wow, you are making the situation 1,000 times worse right now. Just calm down. So anyway, that's kind of the long explanation of it.
Long, but good.
Yeah. And then the last one is just follow up. It's hugely crucial in the role that I'm in to be able to follow up. And this obviously, like some of that had to be done even before I got to the role that I'm in getting to there. But really what a lot of that looks like, since I'm working with a lot of our current customers, clients, they're busy, right? I mean, and even in sales, people are going to be busy and they're not going to want to talk. They don't think that you're trying to solve their problem. They think that you're just trying to sell something to them. So they don't want to talk. So the ability to continually follow up, even when people seem like they're not interested, or maybe it's something even on them, like they know they're interested, but they can't, being able to continuously follow up with grace and knowing what kind of communication you need. Sometimes it comes to the point where you're like, hey, it seems like this is a terrible time for this. I'm sorry, sorry I bothered you. Probably not a good time. If you become interested, like we'll talk then, but otherwise like we're done. Like sometimes you got to be just straightforward with it, but that follow-up is so crucial because sometimes, I mean, I've had sometimes where I emailed somebody 9 times before they actually end up replying, calling, emailing, before they actually reply. And they're like, wait, don't go. Like, I'm interested. Just like it took me a while. So anyway, those are kind of just the 3 that come to mind. Not maybe even not the most critical, but for me have been really crucial for the role that I'm in.
Okay. No, and that makes sense. It sounds like they are primarily all centered around communication, which is phenomenal. And it's great because when you think about it, everything boils down to communication. And you talk to tons of people and you hear that I've heard tons of individuals talk. And when they reference like most of these people, they got their college degree and they went on with their lives and they didn't use the degree at all. And reflecting back, they're like, really, if I could go back and like continue getting my degree, but I'd change it, I'd get an English degree or like a communications degree because they realized the value of communication. So I think it's phenomenal that you broke that down, those 3 different steps or parts of communication that you really need to hone in on and to develop. So perfect, man. Thank you. You were talking to Keep going.
No, I was just going to mention, like, it's one of those weird things because some of it obviously has to be like a natural thing. Like some people are just more naturally gifted at it, but it is something that can be learned. There's a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I didn't read it until, I was even in the role that I'm in. But it's so weird how you can actually think through some of this stuff, some of these communication things, some of these like how to read people. A lot of that can be learned. And if you can do that and learn how to read people and communicate well, like there is really no telling how far you can go in the roles that you're in.
Dale Carnegie. Yep. I love that book. I read that when I was like 18 and 16, I think. And it kind of like changed. It helped, frame my world, you know, it gave me something to lean on. That and like Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, those are like two pillars for anyone going out there trying to be successful, I think. Because like, yeah, fantastic. So yeah, no, back to the next question, which is like, it kind of ties in with the first one. You know, you're really focused in on the communication element of the skills that you need to succeed in your role. But if you were talking to yourself a couple of years ago, and you were trying to like give yourself a little bit of advice to help get you where you are today, you know, what would you have told yourself? What is that thing that like, you know, you look back on and you're like, you know what, I really could have done this better, or I didn't need to stress out about that. You know, what is it? Because we all have one.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes back to just doing it. And what I mean by that is there's a tendency, and I've got like parts of my life that are like more messy and less organized. And then I have part of my life that is like OCD. And part of that is like my people pleasing mentality. And some of that turns into then like, oh, I don't want to like let anybody see what I'm doing until it's absolutely perfect, until there's like not one blemish on it. And I think what I would have done, 4 years ago, is start just doing stuff, start publishing stuff. So whether that be writing. So right now, one of the things that I do is write every day on my blog, and just putting that publish. What's that?
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you're at about day, 300 and something, 400 maybe?
So I think I'm at like 520, something like that.
I stand corrected. That's almost 2 years, people. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. So, I mean, I mentioned a little bit about my background of being homeschooled. When I say homeschooled, I really mean like not schooled. I didn't have a lot of school education growing up. Probably could count on one hand, maybe two hands, the amount of like papers or essays I wrote growing up. So I just didn't have that like writing skill. And it's been hugely beneficial for me now, especially even what I was talking about in the communication, being able to write well and communicate well. But yeah, so kind of going back to the subject of what we're talking about is just publishing. And that doesn't always mean writing, right? But like in the projects that you're working on, learning out loud. So, where I was 4 years ago, I had no experience in like the business world, professional world. 4 years ago, I hadn't done the mechanics. I hadn't done the construction. And being able to give kind of a live feed to other people of what that looks like, it's harder work, right? You've got to go to a little extra work to like document what you're doing, whether that's videos, whether that's writing it down, or just like showing people, putting your work out on the web, even if that's like a little construction project that you did, saying, hey, I have absolutely no clue how to do this project. Watch me fail at it. And videoing that or documenting somehow is so important. And I think, as I said before, it was easy for me to get in this mindset of like, oh, it has to be perfect. And I don't want to like show people something that's not going to be perfect, but that's kind of the beauty of it is if you do that, if I'd done that from 4 years ago and seeing that progress of where I am to now, like, you start showing that to people of like, hey, here's where I started. Here's where I'm at now. Here was my journey. You can track the whole thing. They don't care about what you looked like here, where it was like, oh, that's kind of sucky and nobody really likes that, to like, wow, you've made a ton of progress. Think about like what's going to happen if I hire that guy, or, if he goes to that next step. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I wish that I had done more of, was just hit that publish button more, put it out for the world to see, even your failures. Even if you say like, hey, this week, if you have a lawn mowing business or something, and you say, this week I'm going to mow 30 lawns, and you say, here's my plan to how to do it. Here's my workflow. And then at the end of the week, you do 22 lawns. And it's like, oh no, I failed. I don't want to show other people that. It still shows like, hey, like I made this plan, I failed. Next week, here's how I'm going to try and improve it. So just hit and publish, showing the world what you're doing.
Okay. On that note, is there a particular platform or something that you would advise anyone who wants to take that step? Where would you direct them to go? Like
the actual, like the publishing piece of it?
Yeah, the publishing piece of it, or like, sir, they'll be, oh, like, yeah, you say publish, and they'll think, okay, well, first I need to get involved with some sort of publication then, or, I don't know, create my own blog and build that out.
Yeah.
Like what would you tell those people who
have
those?
That's a great question. I think that even goes back to my first point of like, I want it to be perfect. I want it to be like, absolutely like nothing could be wrong. And I think you're already you're already thinking too far ahead almost of like, oh, I want it to be this, I want it to be that. Literally, if it's posting on Facebook, like, here's like the things that I'm working on, here's what I'm doing a video, you know, with your phone and saying like, hey, like, here's me doing this, putting it on the side of the wall while you're like doing a little workout challenge, something like that. That's literally all you need to start out with that. Once you are at that point, then you can start thinking about other stuff. So there's great avenues. If you're wanting to do more writing, just setting up a simple Medium like blog or so, or whatever, you know, you can set that up super easily. You can start writing there. You can start linking to it on other platforms, on your social media. Social media is a great avenue to be able to start a lot of this stuff. Even if you're putting it in other places, if you're going to I mean, anybody who's under the age of 40 can hopefully figure out how to, I mean, anybody can figure out how to publish a video on YouTube. You know, if you've got a phone, you can do it. You know, a smartphone at least. So just doing that, you know, videoing, writing words down and publishing it on something like Medium or even Facebook or a LinkedIn, and putting it out there. And as you do that, you'll learn like, hey, I want this to be more official. Maybe it comes to the point where, hey, I really do want to like work on a website. Then you can start asking people about how you do that. But don't feel like you've got to like have a website. You got to have all this official stuff before you start doing it. And I think that's what I got caught up on 4 years ago. I was like, oh, I'm not like prepared. I can't like publish that out in the world. It's not pretty yet. Just put it out there.
Absolutely. No, I've completely agreed. And I try telling this to people sometimes where they're like, if they're asking, you know, what can I do with myself? My first question is always, what are your goals? Like, what do you want to be? And then, all right, what's something we can do today to get you there? And for many of these individuals, they don't really know. And in which case I'm like, okay, start writing. You'll figure it out after 30 days. If they're like, oh, I want to do this, I'm like, okay, start writing, start showing these people, build up a portfolio of projects of demonstrating your knowledge and your information and what you can do with this subject. And like, so regardless, like, content creation is extremely valuable. And I think that's a great point. I wish I could have told myself that same thing 4 years ago, because I'd be in a completely different place. That's absolutely for sure, you know?
Oh yeah. And I think there's a quote, it goes something like, people don't get overwhelmed by too much to do. People get overwhelmed by being too vague about whatever it is they have to do. And exactly what you're saying, people have these like, oh, in 5 years, I want to be here. And then they leave it at that. And it's like, nobody knows how to be there in 5 years. It's like, I want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in 5 years. It's like, cool. What the heck does that look like today? So breaking that down into, for me, like with the writing, it was like, hey, I want to become a better writer. That's way too vague. I'm going to write every day. Cool. Now I know now I have like an action item I can do every single day to like potentially get me there, you know, making it really easy for today you to do it. And then 30 days later, 60 days later, a year later, you is going to be like, cool, thanks past me for like setting daily goals.
Yeah, absolutely, man. With that in mind, like, you know, it's been almost 2 years since you've been writing. How did your journey, how did the expectations that you formed at the beginning of that journey, like, matched with where you are today? Because I didn't know, you probably didn't know you wanted to go into sales, but you probably had some idea out there of what you thought you would be doing. And I just want to hear your advice, your input on that. Like, what does it look like? And is it better or worse? How would you compare them?
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting journey, because 2 years ago, definitely did not know I wanted to go into sales. I had no clue. And even like at the start of doing the business apprenticeship program, I went into it and I was like, I want to do something with people because I like people. And somebody suggested sales and I was like, what? That's like, no, that's like the bad guy. Like, I don't want to be the sales guy. And so it was a journey, like learning about what really is sales, because we had like sales in general kind of gets a bad rap, right? You've got your used car salesman who's just trying to pull one over on you, or, you know, whoever else, the telemarketer who's calling your phone, who's just, you know, literally just wanting to talk at you, doesn't want to listen to you. So getting that bad rap. So it's been so interesting learning more about the process of what it is. And I would say like the difference between 2 years ago me and now me is, I mean, there's not even like much of a comparison, because 2 years ago me like didn't even know. So it's been specifically relating to kind of being in the sales world now as an account manager. It's been deeply rewarding, because at the root of what sales is, I think of it as you are trying to give somebody something that what they're giving up is less in return for what they're receiving. And in that way, you are helping people. Like you are helping people to solve problems, and to gain in the world or in the job of whatever they're doing. So it's just been deeply rewarding learning about how to do that, how to help people in something that they previously may have thought was like a dirty thing, sales, get what they need and to help them be more successful. So I would say those are, kind of the differences of where I started at to where I'm at now, and the feelings that I have now about where I'm at.
So with that being said, learning and progressing along that journey, what would you say to an individual who's out there and, they have this idea of what they want to do and they've created all these expectations around it, or they hear about a role like sales and they have all these expectations around it. And so they don't want to go after it because of those expectations or because they have something else that they think they want to do. What would you tell someone like that who is holding back from progressing because of some vague thoughts or vague ideas about a role?
Yeah, man. I mean, talk to someone. I feel like there's this mindset, probably because of a lot of the college mindset of like, okay, you're 18, time to choose what you're going to do. Like pick your degree and go. And the problem is people at 18, depending on their life, they have no clue. Like they've not talked to anybody. They've not like worked in one of those fields. And so they might have this idea. I mean, for example, an example that I often like to use is you might have a friend that's like always like, whether it's a Facebook debate or an in-person, they're always like really good at arguing. And you always have like that parent out there who's like, man, they're so good at arguing. You should be a lawyer. And it's like, that's like a good idea in theory, like cool, like they're good at arguing, but like how much of the time does a lawyer actually spend like how we see them in the movies where they're like arguing a case out on the floor? I honestly don't even know that much about what going into being a lawyer looks like, but my guess is it's a lot more paperwork and legal stuff that you have to deal with, and it might be something that they would hate. And so what I would say, two things. One, just go and talk to somebody who's in the field, who's in the field that you might be interested in, or maybe you don't think you're interested in. That was what I was able to do with sales. I was able to talk to 5 different people who are all professionals in the world of sales and just ask them like, hey, what is the day-to-day life? What does that look like for you? What are things that you wish you had done to get there? What are things that you didn't expect about what you're at now, and just have those conversations with people who are actually there, because then you're not getting like all these other perspectives or just like going down this degree path. You're actually talking to people who are there. So that's one thing. Another thing is potentially being able to like do like free work for that person or in that field that you're potentially interested in. If you are, let's take a random example. If you're interested in mechanics and you say like, this would be a weird one that you'd like go after a degree for, but I'm sure some people would. But instead of like diving into that degree, go and say like, talk to a mechanic and say like, hey, can I work for free for you for a month? And just like learn about it. And they might say no, but you'll be surprised. Like if you're genuinely interested in something, how often people will be like, hey, yeah, like I'll teach you some stuff, especially if you say it's for free. And you may even hold them back in some ways, but you're able to learn more about it. So those are kind of like 2 of the principal things I would say, just go and talk to somebody, just like learn about it. And 2, or 3, I think even this podcast you're doing, like being able to listen to people who are in those fields. Like it's one thing to be able to talk to them, like that's great. But if you can't even do that, then just like find a podcast of somebody talking to it, as you're talking to people, and kind of build up those episodes of people who are in those fields. Go and listen to a podcast of, your favorite, software developer or whatever, and figure out what life is really like for him. Those are all ways to get practical knowledge of what it is, and not just like this headspace of like, oh, it could look like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That was some great advice there, especially because those are very actionable, and, that's the best thing you can do, give someone something bite-sized with some action steps or potential there. So thank you, sir, for that. What advice would you give to someone first starting out in your career? So like what advice would you tell yourself, just starting out in your career? If you could go back and just tell yourself like one thing as an account manager, what would that be?
I think I was super blessed going into the role that I had, because I was able to ask that question to a lot of people who had been in that role of like account manager, sales, and just to ask and be like, hey, what should I be expecting? I've been working in a mechanic shop for the last year. I'm going into software sales. What the heck do I do? So more than my own advice, probably just like feed you some of what I learned from them, because I think it helped me a lot. And so one of the things going into it, depending on what your background is it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose. Like, oh my gosh, there is a lot that you do not know. And that's okay. Like that's what it's going to feel like for probably the first several months. And if you're good at it, honestly, the better you are at it, the longer it's going to feel like that, because you're going to constantly be like learning and consuming more. So one of the best pieces of advice that I heard was kind of around the idea of, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. So it's overwhelming, kind of like even the goal setting thing that we're talking about. So as you go into a role like that, where it's just like, oh my gosh, I have no clue what's happening. If you're in more of that outbound sales, you're going to be like getting so many no's. You're going to be maybe getting yelled at, hung up on. Just take it one day at a time. Learn one new thing every single day. Don't try and focus on learning a million new things. It's like, oh, here's information. Just say like, hey, here was something that I learned from today. And even going back to some of the other stuff that I was talking about, like publishing, talk to somebody about that, publish that, write it down and say like, here's what I learned today. I learned that, so one of the examples that I got from one of my friends who was in this was, I was like working at a restaurant at the time, and I was like, what does that look like? I was working as an expo. I'm like taking food out. I didn't know what all the food looked like. And so he was like, okay, so you learn in this day that if you put this kind of food on this plate and you take that out, that is correct. You've learned that today. You may have 18 other plates that you have no clue what they look like. You had to ask about and you still don't remember, but you learned this today. Retain that. Retain what you learned today. Tomorrow, learn one new thing. So I think all of that to say, just learn one new thing every day. Ask somebody, and as you don't know stuff, write it down. And if you get the chance to talk to a manager, maybe you have a great onboarding process, so you don't even need all this, but write those questions down. And when you have those conversations, be able to ask those. Be like, hey, here was a question I had. Hey, here was another question I had. And just learn one new thing each day.
Perfect, man. That's some good advice. And, like you said, you tied it back in a little bit with the learning out loud and the publishing element that you spoke to earlier, which is phenomenal, because if you are trying to progress with your career, that's one of the best things you can do. And so I really appreciate that advice. Well, Joey, sir, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. If there's a spot or a place that some of the guests would like to go to reach out to you or to learn more about you, where could they do that?
Yeah, I would say, there's several areas. I still continue to publish on my blog every day. So that's just joeywickham.com/blog if you want to go to the blog part. If you want more of a personal look, Instagram is always a fun place to follow. That's probably the main social media that I keep up with. But yeah, either way, if you want to follow along with my professional journey, random thoughts that may or may not be interesting, and follow my blog. If you want to see pictures that sometimes occasionally are interesting, you can follow me on Instagram.
Perfect, man. Well, thank you so much. I will catch you next time.
Cool. Sounds good, man. Have a good one.
You too. Cheers.